Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa. Basketball.
Welcome into another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Ralph, joined as always by my co-host, Connor Hope. Riley Davis is out on assignment today, but we are continuing our season preview series with a look at the West Coast. And Connor, there's probably is not a better time to do our West Coast preview than today. We're recording on Thursday, shortly after the WCC preseason coaches poll dropped, which, if you have not heard, 5 coaches picked St. Mary's to win the league and 4 picked Gonzaga. So St. Mary's was picked to finish first ahead of Gonzaga. I'm sure this has happened before during Gonzaga's run. I do not remember it happening, though, and it's a little jarring to see Gonzaga in second. I would still put Gonzaga first, but I certainly can see the argument for St. Mary's. Connor, as our resident WCC and Gonzaga expert, how did you get this news and how do you react to it?
I mean, like I was saying, I think the gap between Gonzaga and St. Mary's this year is slim. I have Gonzaga number one. I'm pretty sure you have Gonzaga number one, but I don't think it's. I mean, if you look at a top 25 poll, they're 9 spots apart
at most. 9, 10 at
14
most.
14 to 20, 14 to 25. Like that's not a big gap this year in the top 25. Want to know the last time that Gonzaga was ranked or behind St. Mary's was not that long ago. It was 2017. It was right after they went to the national championship. And they lost everybody. And St. Mary's brought back Calvin Hermanson, Nar, Jock Landale. Coaches, rightfully so, thought that maybe Gonzaga takes a big step back. I mean, they were losing a lot from that team. They were losing Nigel Williams-Goss, obviously, Shemek Karnowski, and a bunch of other really solid role players from that team. And I think that's kind of where we're at now, right? Both teams lose their best player from last year.
Yes.
St. Mary's loses their best player and their 4th best player from last year in Logan Johnson. Well, not even 4th, probably 5th best player from last year in Logan Johnson and Bowen. Gonzaga loses their top 2 players from last year, arguably their top 3 players from last year. You could put the debate between Anton Watson and Malachi Smith, especially at the end of the year, is definitely there. I'd probably go 1, 2, 4, but still 3 of their top 4 players from last year all gone. And I think this is a little bit of a play in terms of when those 2 teams are so close together, who has the tougher system to play against? Gonzaga's system is difficult to play against for the first 30 minutes, nearly impossible to play against, especially for WCC teams, for the last 10. St. Mary's is probably the middle ground for the entire game. So if you're expecting Gonzaga to take a step back, not have those high octane scores, not have that, a Julian Strother and Drew Timme both on that roster together, then their tempo doesn't matter as much as the system that Randy Bennett's put in place at St. Mary's, which, I mean, makes every team they play frustrated. You look at the team that played UConn the best last year in the tournament was St. Mary's for the first 15 minutes of that game before Alex Dukas went out. So I don't think it's egregious, especially since it's 5-4, right? If BYU were there, they could very well be both at whatever the 70 points or whatever for the 5-5 in terms of first place votes. I don't think that it's ridiculous, right? I mean, it could have easily been 61-60 Gonzaga's favor, and we'd be having the same conversation. But I do think that, especially when we get to January, February, March, that's when Gonzaga's really going, if they're going to take off, that's when it's going to happen. I think St. Mary's right now is going to look like the better team in November, going to look like the better team in December. We'll see if Ike can get and stay healthy.
Yeah.
If that happens, if Ryan Nemhard can truly run that up-tempo style as well as he did at Creighton with the pieces around him, Dusty Stromer coming in as a freshman, Yo coming in as basically a freshman. If they can all hit, like Gonzaga is clearly the most talented team in this conference, but that St. Mary's system is probably top 5 in terms of most difficult just systems to play against.
We're going to focus a lot of this conversation on Gonzaga because the more jarring part is seeing Gonzaga second, right? Like that's part of it. From the St. Mary's perspective, they're up there because of the amount they return. They have more proven commodities. They have more experience. And Aiden Mahaney might be the best player on the two teams. If he's not, he's certainly top 2. It kind of depends how you feel about Nemhard. So like that plays into it certainly as well. I'm with you in terms of I'd have Gonzaga number 1 as well. I think that speaks to the upside and just kind of blind faith in Mark Few and that Gonzaga system at that point, or at this point, to thinking that it's more likely than not that Gonzaga finishes closer to their upside than not, right? At the same time, you can say that and acknowledge that there are legitimate questions about Gonzaga producing another Gonzaga-like season, or what we've come to expect from Gonzaga recently, right? Like Ryan Nemhard, there are questions about changing systems and changing teams, obviously, but given his skill set and his experience, I don't have any doubts about his ability to run the system. I think that's fine. Graham Ike, if he does play, there's the question of can he return to the form of 2 years ago? If he doesn't play, there is now a whole nother issue of your front court production and front court depth. Become pretty much like, all right, can Ben Gregg and Anton Watson really carry the load in terms of proven and experienced guys? I think you need Anton Watson to step up and be more than the role player that he was the last few years. You either need him or Nolan Hickman too. And both of those guys are still at Gonzaga because they had not been able to yet. I think you could argue that Watson had probably not been put in position to, just given who he was playing behind and playing next to a Drew Timme. Unless you are another Drew Timme level player, you're going to be second. There's no harm in that. But you need one of those kind of career role players to become a go-to guy or something similar, a reliable number 2 at the very least. And you're hoping that Steele Venters translates from Eastern Washington, right? Which we think he will, but he certainly will not be the first highly decorated player to succeed at a low major and then struggle moving up a level, right? Plus, there's a lot of youth on that bench. Talent, absolutely, but a lot of youth. It's not outlandish to look at Gonzaga and think they might struggle some this year. Certainly in comparison to the expectation level and the standard that Gonzaga has set, right? The bottom's not falling out. I don't think Gonzaga's finishing middle of the pack in WCC play or anything like that. But there are concerns and questions that, while we believe they can be answered, I can see a realistic viewpoint. You can look at it and say, I don't know if they will.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting because I really don't know how they're going to run their offense, right? Because if I were Mark Few, as long as Andrew Nemhard is on the floor, I would run him as the sole point guard.
Yes.
Even if Hickman's in there, I would run Andrew Nemhard as the sole point guard. I would have Hickman and Steele Venters or Dusty Stromer at the 2-3 sitting on the wings. Because Hickman, when he was not the primary ball handler, looked good as a shooter.
Mm-hmm.
His issue was he was sometimes sloppy with the ball, and he wasn't really a one-on-one ISO scorer. Like, he couldn't create his own shot as well as you would have liked.
Mm-hmm.
Anton Watson strikes me as the type of player that can be a, net neutral, net plus shooter from the outside if you need him to be at the 4. Really, it comes down to Graham Ike, because if he's not there, Your 5 is Anton Watson, presumably. You'd presumably move someone else up to the 4. Ben
Right.
Gregg, who's a true stretch big, but that's not really what you need in this Gonzaga system, especially at the starting 5 role. And a bunch of other players who, like a Braden Huff, who looks big and looks ready, but he also hasn't played real college game minutes yet. And that's basically it. Like those are the bigs that you trust, or you think you could trust, to run this system. Now, they're slow rolling Graham Ike, which makes sense. They don't want him to have any setbacks because they know they need him. I don't know if he returns to his previous form, but even 80% of Graham Ike, I think, is a better fit for that 5 role than having Anton Watson at the 5 and someone else at the 4, or a Ben Gregg start at the 5, or relying on a freshman to play big minutes at the 5. Like, if Graham Ike is 80%, maybe we drop, I already have Gonzaga in that 14 to 17 range, but like maybe the people who have them in the top 10 drop them to that 14 to 17 range. I think 80% of Graham Ike is right on par with Mitchell Saxon at St. Mary's. Like St. Mary's, it's a lot of their 3 top players are as good as the top 3 players at Gonzaga, probably, and the system is tough. And that's why they ranked in the number 1 in the WCC. I like Gonzaga's depth. They just need their top 3 players to deliver.
Is there a third team that can potentially jump up in there in the WCC standings and not necessarily compete with St. Mary's and Gonzaga, but play that BYU role of kind of playing spoiler and being the third banana of an upper tier? Is there anybody who you think can climb in there with those 2?
I don't think there's anyone who can be, well, they could be BYU of the past couple of years. I don't think there's anyone that could be the clear third team. I think it's going to come down to San Francisco, LMU, Santa Clara. I know San Francisco was 3rd in the poll. I really like the roster at LMU. So we'll see. My money would be on San Francisco. I think in that situation, they bring in Mongolian Mike. They have a bunch of other players that I think are going to be pretty solid for them. I just don't see the same talent level from LMU across the board. I know Kalilea Pepe is probably going to be in that conversation as an all WCC caliber player the entire year, but like, who else around him steps up? And then for Santa Clara, at some point, you have to bet on their streak of finding diamond in the rough guards that can take over games to end. Like,
maybe.
And maybe not. They've had really good guard play in the past, though, just not to the level of a Jalen Williams or a Pajemski. But I'm not betting on it this year with the players they have.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's stop by the Mountain West on our West Coast preview before we dive into the Pac-12 as we're over here. Similar boat, San Diego State picked atop the Mountain West. Not a huge surprise there. There is a cluster of about 4 teams behind San Diego State, though, with Boise State, Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado State kind of all inching around there in what I consider to be the second tier of that league. Before we dive into those 4 and the rest of the league, I want to talk about San Diego State, though. Obviously coming off a national championship game appearance, best season in program history, best finish in program history. What do you think the Aztecs can do for an encore? Because I look at this team, and this isn't a group I expect to take a step back.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they take a step back, mainly because I think that last year they were probably the 4th best team on the West Coast heading into the tournament. Like,
maybe in your mind,
UCLA was better than San Diego State. They got hurt. I would still argue Gonzaga was better. They just played UConn before San Diego State played UConn.
That math checks out.
Arizona, you could argue, but I mean, Arizona was a 2 seed. I'm not going to argue against it. So At worst, though, fourth best team on the West Coast. Heading into this year, I still think they're top 4 on the West Coast. I think they're probably around the same level caliber that they were last year. I know they do lose some key pieces from last year's roster. I think you'll be looking at them at the end of the year and they'll be top 2. Like I think it's going to be either Gonzaga or St. Mary's and San Diego State as the top 2 on the West Coast. I don't trust the Pac-12, but we can get to that later.
Yeah, we'll get there later. I think there's a chance Arizona creeps in there. San Diego State, I expect to be a top 15, top 10 team all season long. Like I don't think this is a program that's going anywhere. They lost some key pieces, and you got to replace Matt Bradley. Yes, you have to replace Keldon Johnson. Keisha Johnson. Excuse me.
Keisha Johnson.
You got to replace Keisha Johnson. I'm got Keldon on my brain for some reason. And you have to replace Nathan Mensah. Johnson and Mensah are the 2 interesting ones to me.
Mensah's the toughest one on this roster to replace.
Right, because of the defense that Mensah brings. And Johnson had so much versatility and switchability, added rim protection as well. Like those are things that are more difficult to replace for San Diego State, given the way that they play. And Mensah's ability down low, while he did kind of get abused by Sunoco and Klingon in the championship game, allowed San Diego State's defense to, I think, operate at its peak level, at its peak efficiency.
Right.
And I don't think the defense is going to be at that level again. I've gotten to the point where I expect San Diego State to put forth a good defense every single year. I don't expect it to be at the same level.
I think their defense will be as good or better than it was last year on the perimeter.
Yes.
I think Reese Waters is a better defender than Matt Bradley. As big and bulky and strong and hard to move as Matt Bradley is, Reese Waters showed, and maybe it was the USC system, but he showed that he can be a really good defender on the wing. To me, Jaden Ledee, I don't see as replacing Mensah. Jay Powell is going to have a really tough time replacing Keisha Johnson. There's not a ton of shooting, but again, they didn't have a ton of shooting last year. Really, it comes down to, can Micah Parrish have a better shooting year than he had last year? Because I think at times last year it looked really rough. Same with Lamont Butler. And some of their freshmen, I think, need to step up. But this starting 5, to me, offensively, is better than it was last year.
Yes.
You don't have a ball. Like, say what you want about Matt Bradley and his ability to create his own shot. I mean, he stopped the ball a lot on that offense. And he had to at times because they couldn't score. But I think their offense might flow a little bit better this year, which could potentially make up for what they lose defensively.
Yeah, I think the step back that they may take defensively, which they can take a step back and still be an elite defense, I think the step back they take is offset by a step forward they make offensively. They're probably going to have to play smaller than they did last year. It's one of the byproducts of losing a guy like Mensah. But I think that can open things up for them offensively, because you go through that backcourt, Parrish, Waters, Butler, and Trammell. All 4 of those guys can shoot and can do so at a high level. They've ebbed and flowed throughout their career, specifically at San Diego State. But all 4 of those guys are ones that I think I would trust to knock down an open shot, right? And I think there are more options in that aspect than San Diego State had last year. Now, going small might change some things defensively, and it remains to be seen how big of an impact that has. But again, I trust Brian Dutcher and that San Diego State system and the coaches to have them playing at an elite level defensively. If the offense is able to take that step forward, can stretch the defense a little bit more with better shooting, and be a little bit more dynamic, more dangerous. I wouldn't expect them to make the Final Four again, certainly, but I would not put another long tournament run out of the question for this group. Like the talent is still there. The experience is still there. The experience is still there in the backcourt. And one of the things that I think helped them last year is that there aren't many good guards around the country, right? Like guard play is generally down and it has been the last couple of years. So when you have quality guards who are experienced and can create like San Diego State's can, I think that helped them last year. And you add Waters to that mix, I think it helps them a little bit more too.
Yeah, I mean, their backcourt, and specifically in the Mountain West, best defensive backcourt in the Mountain West.
Yes.
And one of the better offensive backcourts in the Mountain West. So I agree. I think they are clearly ahead of a bunch of other Mountain West teams that's, I think, pretty deep in terms of, I think 2 through 6, 2 through 5 are all really close, but I don't think they're close to San Diego State.
I agree. I think that next group of 4 are probably teams that would feel bad if they didn't make the NCAA tournament, right? Like have realistic NCAA tournament expectations placed on them this season. Colorado State, New Mexico, Nevada, Boise State being in that group. Is there anybody in that group that you have a lot of confidence in or faith in? I doing stuff for the Almanac. I had a number of these teams, and I really, really like what Nevada has. They're a big team, has a lot of experience, dynamic guard play again. It's going to be much, much deeper than they were last year. I actually think they'll finish second. I know Boise State was picked 2. I think they can. And then you know how much I love Colorado State and how much I love Isaiah Stevens. Having him back and a guard of that caliber back, I think gives Colorado State the ability to beat anybody.
Yeah, I think I'd go Colorado State, because I think if you have a player like Isaiah Stevens, who, even if the team around him might not be of the same caliber as, say, the New Mexico backcourt or Nevada, having a player that can elevate everyone around him, I think, is a much bigger asset than people give it credit for. Mm-hmm. And so Isaiah Stevens, probably the best player in the conference.
Yes.
And you put a team around him that just feeds into what he does best, which is create shots for others, create shots for himself. Like, I think that Colorado State team is really tough to prepare for, and I think they'll finish second behind San Diego State. Granted, I still think they finish multiple games behind San Diego State, but I think they'll end up finishing second as long as Stevens is on the floor and can stay on the floor. But I don't really have any questions about that.
One thing I want to point out too is we've talked about these Mountain West teams. Guard play around the country is down and has been, but we have now gone through San Diego State, Colorado State, Nevada. You throw New Mexico in that mix too. You can probably throw Boise in that mix too, of teams with really good experienced guards. Like, that's why the Mountain West, I think, has had this resurgence the last couple of years, is because of the guard play in the league, while guard play has kind of dwindled everywhere else. So I think that bodes well for the league, both in regular season and then when we get to the NCAA tournament, where maybe some teams other than San Diego State can win some games and make a second weekend. Outside of those 5,
I think guard play on the West Coast in general, is going to be pretty strong this year. Like, even down to...
Is that because Caleb Love's on the West Coast now?
No. I mean, yes, but no. I mean, you look at the Pac-12, they have some teams with really strong guards. You look at the WCC, their top 4 of their top 5 teams are probably going to be built around their guard play. You look at the Big West, they have 2 of the best mid-major guards in the country in Elijah Pepper and AJ Mitchell. I think the West Coast and Big Sky has always been a conference of guard play. Mm-hmm. So I think the West Coast in general has really strong guard play, which is why you look at these teams. Like, the West Coast is the conference where you either really like some of these mid-majors to pull an upset come March pretty much every year, or you have these surprise Pac-12 teams or these surprise Mountain West teams that go on a little bit of a run, and it's because a lot of these teams are built around the guards.
Natural segue to the Pac-12 there, and Caleb Love, who is now at Arizona. They were picked to win the Pac-12 not a huge surprise there. UCLA, USC, and Oregon rounded out the top 4, with Colorado being 5th. Arizona State was 6th, which was interesting. Our favorite Cal Golden Bears were down at 11th. I don't know if the voters realize that this is not Mark Fox's Cal team, but Mark Madsen's Cal team. But we'll talk about that moving forward. Did they get it right with Arizona at first? To me, I don't think there's another real case to be made. I think Arizona was the right choice.
Yeah, and especially given, and I know they say he's going to play this year, but especially given the uncertainty surrounding Bronny James and Iwachukwu for USC, like both of them are uncertain for the start of the year. Like I think that's plays a big role. Where I'm sort of questioning it, Colorado being 5th and being 5th that far behind UCLA, where UCLA picked up 4 first place votes, like that to me is a little bit of a question mark.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily Colorado being 5th, because I think UCLA, right, Oregon, Colorado, I would have it almost flipped. I'd have Colorado 3rd and then the other 2 probably 4th and 5th in some order. But UCLA getting 4 first place votes to me is just wrong. Like USC at least has the pedigree on the team, so you can kind of justify it that way. But UCLA getting 4 first place votes when there's basically only uncertainty on that roster,
right,
is crazy to me.
I think you can sell me on UCLA if you believe the worst versions of Arizona, a belief that USC is never going to get healthy, and the belief that some of the younger guys on UCLA have big breakout seasons. Like, I think Bona has a chance to be the best player in the league. I don't know if he will, but I think he's got a chance to. I really like Dylan Andrews stepping in at point guard there, taking over for Tiger Campbell. I think he's going to be an all-conference caliber kind of player. I think there are a number of guys who could take steps forwards like that. At the same time, I don't think 4 votes there that's a bit outlandish, having that. Before everything happened with Bronny, I think I liked USC the most out of the Pac-12, and then with rumors about him and Vince, the big guy from who had the similar heart thing last year, not being ready to go, it's obviously unfortunate. There are bigger things at play than just basketball there. But when healthy, I think USC has a chance to be the best team in this league. But it does not look like they're going to be.
And I don't know. I think people might be overplaying the impact of losing those 2, right? Because you look at a team without those 2, and their starting 5 is Collier, Boogie Ellis, Kobe Johnson, DJ Rodman, Joshua Morgan. Like right. And it's the reason why they're second. Yep. That is a top 2, top 3 starting 5 in the Pac-12 without 2 5-stars for presumably a good portion of the beginning of the season. So I like USC. Even if they had those 2, I'd probably still have Arizona first. I've said it before. I think that, I downplayed how difficult it is to play against the Gonzaga system when we were talking about St. Mary's. But none of these Pac-12 teams run a St. Mary's system.
Right.
And if Kylan Boswell doesn't hit, you still have Caleb Love and Jaden Bradley. Right. If Caleb Love doesn't hit, you still have Kylan Boswell and Jaden Bradley. Like, you have enough depth there where it's not a matter of this guy, and this guy need to hit. For Arizona, it's like, we need like 2 of these 3 or 4 guards to hit. Right. We need Pell Larson to be a double-digit scorer instead of 9.9 per game, right? Keyshawn Johnson just needs to be what he was at San Diego State. So I think the biggest question mark for Arizona is the depth in the front court.
Yep.
But I don't necessarily think that is an issue where if it's middling, it's the end of the world.
So I want to talk about Arizona because I am pretty high on them. But before I do, I want to ask you, because this is kind of a thought I've had. Given Tommy Lloyd's track record at Gonzaga and the way that they've played, how much of the front court too big system that Arizona utilized so well these last couple of years is simply because of who he had on the roster he inherited versus the way he wants to play? Because I think going smaller and having one big on the court might be better and fit more of what he wants to do in terms of getting up and down the court. So the
he's
court
going to
depth
go.
would not concern me as much.
No. He's going to go one. I mean, that's like he's going to go one big. Keyshawn Johnson's going to play the 4.
Yep.
He's not a big. It's that one big spot is really like the question mark, right? Because behind him, you have some players who played like 3 to 7 minutes a game last year and some freshmen. So they have 3 7-footers on this roster, so I'm sure they'll figure. And Henry Visar is like 6'10", so I'm sure they'll figure it out. But no, last year it was Tommy Lloyd not being Matt Painter was why they played 2 bigs in the front court.
Incredible. I thought you could only play one at a time. But yeah, so like I think Arizona has legitimate Final Four potential this year. In fact, I picked them to go to the Final Four for the Almanac. They're one of my picks. I think the Caleb Love experiment, if it's going to work, if Caleb Love's going to work anywhere, he's going to work here. Caleb Love, ideally, in a perfect world, has a skill set to excel in transition. It's what he does. Except for the fact that he rarely looked to push the ball in attack and transition last year when he was at UNC. So if Tommy Lloyd is able to get him to attack more and push more in transition, which I'm going to guess Tommy Lloyd will, because Tommy Lloyd has done that with all of his guards. I think that works. And then you have Jaden Bradley, who kind of played a minor role for Alabama, but showed the ability to do everything off the bounce, create for himself, pass with Boswell. I think that's as good of a 3-man guard trio as you can find in the country. Again, as long as the Love thing works out in a positive manner. And I'm going to guess right now, before we see it on the court, that it will, just based on the system and Lloyd's track record. You have the experience. You have Larson, Johnson, Ballo in the front court. I think your top 6 is phenomenal. I think you can piece together enough depth behind that to be quality, right? The fact that no one else, I don't think there's really anybody else in the Pac-12 that can touch them aside from a healthy USC. And while I agree with you that USC is going to be very good anyways, I think the ceiling for Arizona is to be like a top 5 team in the country that spends some weeks at number 1. And I don't think USC can get there and play at that level without those guys, right? I think they need to be healthy to be at that level. So like, to me, if I'm an Arizona fan, this has a chance to be a special season. That's kind of what I would go into it hoping and half expecting.
Arizona, I might just start calling Alabama West for the entire season. Like, I think their ceiling is Final Four good. Yeah. I'm not going to discount the fact that the Caleb Love experiment could lead to a first weekend loss. Like, that's just the world that Tommy Lloyd has put Arizona in. Is you're putting a lot of faith in.
If they lose early again, like how does the conversation about Tommy Lloyd go from that point on?
Okay, so let's assume they win the Pac-12. So they win the Pac-12 and lose early.
Yes,
I think he's safe.
Oh yeah, like he's not going to be fired. I think the conversation becomes like, that now Tommy Lloyd's the one who can't win the big one, right? Or that he's not a postseason coach.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you're going to run into that. It'll be interesting because what if they win the Pac-12 and the Pac-12 tournament? So like they've won in the postseason and then I don't know who's a good 8 seed. Let's say they take on an 8 seed. Let's say they take on San Diego State.
San Diego State, perfect.
Yeah. Let's say they take on San Diego State. They take on San Diego State, and you're putting Caleb Love, who's already volatile, against that San Diego State perimeter defense. And they lose.
San Diego State's going to be better than an 8 seed, but your point stands. That kind of team.
Yeah.
That kind of team.
Let's say Arizona is a 2 seed and San Diego State's a 7 seed, because I think that's where Lenardi has them. So, and Lenardi's king, right?
Of course. If you want real bracketology, check out Lucas Harkins on HXCBB.com. He is significantly better than Lenardi, and he has the stats to back it up. But sorry, proceed.
But someone of that ilk, right? Like a Michigan State of last year,
point stands,
or San Diego State of last year, right? Point stands. They lose now. If they look thoroughly outclassed, I think the conversation's different. But let's say they lose by 2. And part of it is because the opposing team plays Hack and Umar for 5 minutes towards the end of the game, right? Just throwing out something that would never happen, but probably should. I don't know if I mean, it might happen with Arizona fans, but I don't know. We've seen so many top seeded teams over the last couple of years lose, that I think this idea that losing early in March is like a death sentence to a coach from a public perspective is kind of lessening. Like, there are still people who say Matt Painter can't win the big one, but I think Matt Painter's kind of outcoached the reputation as not winning in March. Rick Barnes has certainly started to outcoach the reputation of not winning in March. So
I think the counter to both of those is it's just accepted that they don't win. And they're not necessarily, they're not at places like Arizona, right? Arizona fans wanted to put Tommy Lloyd in hot water a couple months ago because his recruiting class wasn't good enough and he hadn't hit the transfer portal hard enough. And then he goes in and brings out some, it's all well and good now and Arizona fans are happy with what he did. But there was legitimate panic that they missed out on a couple guys like Nemhard. And the conversation became, well, Lloyd's not a good recruiter.
They also defended their coach who couldn't make the Final Four while his program was cheating for months. So
yes, yes, this is true. I mean, this is true. I was just curious to see how that conversation would go. But I think expectations are this is Arizona's conference to lose. Well, let's talk Colorado for a second, because I think they're a team that I think has the more realistic upside to finish third. I think UCLA is probably the safer bet even than Oregon, given some of Oregon's recent struggles to finish third. How do you stack up with Colorado team? Because to me, I see the talent and I see what's there on paper. I also see Ted Boyle, and I also see some issues that I don't know can be totally overcome. This is not a team I'm not automatically penciling in, best case scenario for.
I think one bonus is that their 5-star recruit, Cody Williams, is protected a little bit. A lot of other 5-star recruits, a lot of other top freshmen or even sophomores who were a role player that are making the leap into being a full-time starter, they need to deliver at a top 1 or 2 on their team level to reach this team's ceiling. Tristan Da Silva is the top player on this team. He's going to be the top option. He's the guy who shoots 40% from 3. He's the guy who put up 16 and 5 last year. Really good defender. Cody Williams can just kind of be a perimeter player, a wing player that helps this team. Is really long, can play around KJ Simpson and Julian Hammond and kind of pick and choose where he takes his shots, and doesn't have to take over the game for Colorado to win. We will see how, Eddie Lampkin does at Colorado.
Yeah.
Because behind him, they have 2 freshmen playing the 5.
Right.
So you might see a lot of Tristan Da Silva at the 5, which I wouldn't be upset by. because I think he's that versatile, and it gives Colorado a really interesting small ball lineup. Small ball being in quotes, because I think if you run Tristan Da Silva at the 5, you're going to still have 3 players 6'7" or taller in that lineup. But I think they're going to be a team that is up and down the entire season.
Yeah,
like they're going to beat a USC they might go 1-3, but they're going to pick off a win or two against Arizona and USC over the course of the season. They're going to beat some really good teams. They could also lose to Washington. So I think it's kind of, they're going to be like that team that's up and down, up and down, up and down. They make it into the tournament, and you don't really know what to make of them.
Yeah,
because they could be a double-digit seed that pulls an upset, and then like they could be a 12 seed that pulls an upset and then loses to like a 13 seed or an 11 seed or whoever they play in the second round of the bracket.
We're talking about 8, 9, 7, 10 games before. Like Colorado to me fits in there and would have the outcomes of beating the 1 seed, the 1 seed or the 2 seed to get to the Sweet 16, or losing the first round matchup by 20. And both scenarios would be equally likely. Right.
Yeah.
You brought up Washington. Outside of that top 5, is there anybody who you are keeping an eye on or higher on than maybe the general consensus? And we'll get to Cal. We'll get to Cal after this. But is there anybody else that you like?
Cal is my answer.
Well, we can talk about Cal now, because I think Cal is the only other team in this league I'm excited about.
Yeah, because I like the rosters for Stanford and Washington on paper, kind of, if their coaches were not also on the same paper. Right. But this Cal team is that, they're the flip side of Colorado, right? They are going to be a below average team in the Pac-12 that could also pick off teams at the top. It's going to be interesting because it's a lot of turnover. Their starting 5 presumably is going to be 4 transfers and Grant Newell. Devin Askew is going to be their 6th or 7th man off the bench, which first or second off the bench, but 6th or 7th. I
forgot Askew was still around, and him coming off the bench probably isn't a bad thing.
But you run down this roster, right? Jalen Cone, at the Big Sky level, was like a threat to score 25 to 30 basically any given night. I don't think he does that. I think he's more of a 8 to 11, maybe like a 12 to 13 type scorer. I know that's a big range, but as I've said consistently, the one scoring stat, or 2, I guess, because free throw shooting should be in there as well. The one scoring stat in from the field that translates well is 3-point shooting, because you're not contending necessarily with a bunch of high major bodies down low. You're shooting threes, and 3-point defense is not really a sticky stat. But they've got Jalen Cone, 40% from 3. Keontae Kennedy, 38% from 3. Fardaws Aimaq knows the system that Mark Madsen wants to play. Grant Newell, not really a big scorer, but I like him as a defender, especially if you put him at the 4 and he can give some smaller stretch, smaller 4s some difficulties, but I think he can also guard some of the bigger 4s that might be playing in the Pac-12. Celestine coming back from his injury, I think, is huge. He's going to be their 6th man. You've got Askew, Okafor, Bowser, who all played, last year, probably coming off the bench, and then some really good freshmen. Like, this team doesn't have the marquee player that you need, I think, to be put in the conversation of the top 5. But Cal, I'm not picking them 6th, but I think Cal's ceiling is that. Like, I think Cal could finish as a top half team in this Pac-12, because there's not really another inspiring team. I wouldn't even say Oregon's inspiring, but there's not really an inspiring team outside the top 5.
I would put Cal 6th or 7th, depending on how you felt about Washington. All like
I have Cal 6th. I think I have Washington. Cal 7th. I think I have Washington 6th.
Yeah.
But I'd have to look again.
I love what they did in the portal, and I think the guys they brought in fit well together. Again, on paper, but I also trust Mark Madsen enough as a coach to make it work, given what we saw from him, what we've seen from him throughout his career. They're going to be a team.
Someone the other day say that Madsen wasn't a great hire, and I almost pulled my hair out because they were like saying like the best coaching hires, and there was like 20 names, and Madsen wasn't on there, and I was like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, and especially for Cal.
Yeah, and you mentioned the transfer portal. Like, this is where like I really liked Cal's transfer class, and I don't think it started getting respect until recently.
Yeah.
And I really hated West Virginia's transfer class. And I think it's now playing out that everyone hates their transfer class.
Yeah.
So it's cathartic to see everyone catching up, but also I think people are going way overboard with West Virginia. But we can talk about that during the Big 12.
Yeah, with Cal, right, I don't think that the guy is there to take them into that top 4, top 5. But I think there's more than enough there to have them be middle of the road in the Pac-12 and be an NIT team. Like, I think that's kind of my expectations for them. I'm rooting for Cal this year. I like Madsen a lot. I like the guys they brought in. I think it'd be fun to have Cal be relevant again. Do you want to play a fun game real quick?
Yeah, let's play a fun game.
Where does future ACC member Cal finish if they're in the ACC this year?
All right, they'll be behind North Carolina and Duke and Virginia. They'll be behind
Miami.
I would,
because I think they finish 5th.
Maybe I would say 6th. I'd put them in the Syracuse Clemson bucket. I don't know if I would have who I would have 5th, 6th, or 7th, so I'll just split the difference and say Cal would finish 6th, but 6th.
Just want to remind everybody that California is going to be in the Atlantic Coast Conference next year, because yay!
Well, it's great. Everything is fine. I actually like the realignment for basketball. Outside, like Cal and Stanford to the ACC, I think is like the weirdest one.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as getting Arizona into the Big 12, USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington into the Big 10, like I think that makes more sense than having them play Oregon State twice a year.
Yeah, so. I think that Stanford, Cal, SMU. I'll throw SMU aside because I think SMU kind of makes sense. But Cal and Stanford going to the ACC is the only dumb move of this realignment. I'm sad that Pac-12 is no more because I think the Pac-12 is fun. But I really like.
I am excited. I'm excited to see what they do with scheduling because I've been to 2 Cal, and for football specifically, not necessarily, I mean basketball too, but like I've been to 2 Cal games. They've both been really late. And you could tell, I think, with Auburn that they kind of came out a little bit slow. Mm-hmm. They played slow the entire game and they pulled it out, but I think that's just because it's Cal football. It'll be interesting to see a team like Duke or North Carolina or Syracuse playing would they play a 7 p.m. game on the West Coast? Like, or is Cal just going to have day games at home the entire season?
No, I think you have to do that. I think you have to do that.
Yeah.
Kind of hot take here. Again, aside from Cal Stanford, I think realignment has actually been good for college basketball.
Oh, it's been fantastic for college basketball.
It is condensing the conferences stinks on the surface. And again, I still wish the Pac-12 was a thing. But what it's going to do is going to give us more high-profile regular season matchups which is great for college basketball fans.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also going to open up, I think, more bids for non-power conferences in the NCAA tournament, as long as the NCAA tournament stays the way that it is, because I still think there is something about the number of losses and conference records that is going to matter to the selection committee. I know they've kind of been lax on this, but you're going to have a hard time like putting a 19-15 Rutgers team that went 8-12 in Big Ten play. Even if the Big Ten is stronger, you're going to have a hard time putting them in over a second place Mountain West team or a third place Mountain West team that has a good record but didn't play a super tough non-conference schedule. Do you know what I mean? So like I think it opens.
Yeah, I mean,
it at least opens the door for more mid-majors to get in.
Right, and it's you take the 4 or 5 bids from the Pac-12 and you split them up. Like you're probably splitting it 4-1, 3-2, like 3 or 4 more bids to the big conferences, and then
Right.
1 or 2 to the mid majors. But 1 or 2 to the mid majors, I think, is fantastic because we've seen every year it's like 1 or 2 mid majors that you're just scratching your head going,
Right.
how did they not get in?
We almost had a 2-bid SoCon one year. Like I think this would have been the year of that scenario played out where UNC Greensboro gets in, right? I talked last year about a 2-bid Sun Belt. Wasn't quite the scenario for that, but that kind of scenario where you have a team at a mid-major or low-major level that dominates all regular season and then loses in a conference tournament championship game or something like that, and now no longer gets the auto bid. I think those teams have a little bit more hope now, or will have more hope of getting that at large bid, or at least being rewarded for what they did all season long.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And do we need to talk about Oregon State, Stanford, Wazoo, or can I wax poetic about Gonzaga, Big 12?
Let's wax poetic about Gonzaga, Big 12.
Oregon State's going to finish last. Washington State's probably going to finish bottom 4. Stanford has some good players, but whenever you give Haas expectations, although he doesn't have expectations based on the poll, whenever you give him expectations, he doesn't deliver. Whenever you don't, he kind of delivers. That's those 3 teams in a nutshell.
Yep.
Oregon's really big or really small, depending on what position you look at. They're going to be 7 foot at the 4 and 5. They're going to be under 6'5" at the 1 through 3. And Mookie Cook is now expected to miss some games to start the year. So that's why I don't think they're inspiring. I think the freshmen are going to be protected somewhat because they have so many seniors, but their seniors, again, are also not very inspiring. So I've sort of lost faith. Like I'd have Oregon 5th just because I think there's talent there. And I don't want to discount Dana Altman as a coach. But I think Colorado's much more talented. I think UCLA is much more talented. And then Arizona State, don't know what to make of them. Frankie Collins is their point guard. He played well last year, but he was also surrounded by some really outstanding players that are no longer there. So anything you want to add about those teams before we move on to Gonzaga Big 12?
No, I think we spent more time than I anticipated talking about those teams. So let's move on.
So Gonzaga Big 12, I think at this point has to happen for 2 reasons. One, it's not a, and I tweeted this out the other day, it is not a Gonzaga needs to join the Big 12 so they can compete in March, because we've already seen that they can compete in March, whether they're in the Big 12 or the WCC. It's not even really about money, because they'd have to probably take less money than they're getting now, at least until they become a full member, and then who knows what happens after that. They'll probably make more than they make right now, but like it's kind of a money move, kind of not. I think it is the money combined with the recruiting that it would presumably help, but mostly, and I think you saw, I mean, Fran Fraschilla is now like full on, it's going to happen, which I don't know if I'd be that confident, but there's definitely a non-zero chance that the Power 5 or the 5 high major conferences break away. I don't know if the Big East would, but I think if the other 4 did, they would. So if that happens, you don't want to be on the outside looking in.
Yes.
Worst case scenario, they join the Big 12 They don't make as much money until they become a full member, make probably the same or more after they become a full member. Make the tournament, 70% of the time, 60 to 70% of the time, worst case scenario, 60 to 70% of the time, compete in the Big 12, are just a Texas Tech or a Kansas State or a TC. Like, they're a team that, the program's really good. They might not be a Baylor or a Kansas or a Houston. They'd be Houston. Houston's the worst case scenario for Gonzaga.
Yeah.
I think best case scenario is and I say best, I'll put quotes around the best case scenario is the high majors do break away. Gonzaga is now part of that group.
Yep.
That breaks away. Worst case scenario, best case scenario for staying in the WCC is they continue to make the tournament every year, continue to make, contend for national championships, Final Fours. They protect themselves a little bit if things go downhill after Mark Few leaves, and they're still, there. They're just where they are. Like, best case scenario if they stay in the WCC is status quo.
Right.
Worst case scenario if they stay in the WCC is the high majors break away. Gonzaga, Mark Few's left. Gonzaga has seen a dip, and now they're not getting an invite.
Right.
And I think it's a little bit of that. The worst case scenario of staying is so bad that you almost would rather have the worst case scenario of leaving than like somewhere in the middle of staying. And so, I've seen a lot of people say, well, of course they want to go to the Big 12 because iron sharpens iron. That's not what this is about. If iron sharpened iron, they go to the Mountain West, right? Like, at this point, or stay in the WCC. The WCC is getting better. Because all the other logistics around it don't make sense. The only reason it makes sense is because there is a growing sense that the high major conferences don't want any part of giving 30 to 40% of the NCAA tournament share revenue to the mid majors.
That is why Gonzaga makes this move. And I think it's also why the Big 12 wants Gonzaga. Because there are a couple things here, right? So if those conferences break away, it's going to be led by the SEC and the Big 10 and whatever's really left of the ACC. Probably, who knows there, but that's what's going to be led by. Football drives all of this and has driven realignment. It's driven everything because college football is where all the big money is for TV. And they're the ones, ESPN, Fox, who are operating all of this, right? Well, the only other major moneymaker in college sports, now college sports in general is a moneymaker, but the major ones are college football and the NCAA tournament, to be exact, right? So if you break away, you're going to have or want to have the equivalent of the NCAA tournament in your new league, right? I think your point about the Big East, I think the Big East comes along into that for that reason, right? If you are the Big 12, you kind of know you can't get or afford any more big football names. A, because they've all been snatched up. B, like Clemson and Florida State and UNC have their eyes set elsewhere. And then the Big Two have their eyes set on them. So that's not going to happen. But you've gotten numbers, and their strategy, or part of the strategy, has been to get as many big basketball brands as possible. That's why you go out and get Houston. That's why historically you go out and you get Cincinnati. BYU certainly cares about basketball in their giant arena and has had good teams in the past, right? You bring in Arizona. That's interesting. You bring in Gonzaga. That's another giant basketball brand who further makes you more appealing to that breakoff. Because if it's just football, the brands in the Big 12 are fine, right? But they kind of operate that middle ground. The basketball.
If it was just football, the conversations would be with Boise State
Right.
San Diego State,
Yeah.
not with Gonzaga.
But instead, they've been with Gonzaga and UConn. Right.
Yeah.
Like, so that goes
UConn
into the
has
big
a football program.
Yeah, but yeah. But that goes into the Big 12's thinking and is why they're interested in Gonzaga. So like if you're Gonzaga, it makes sense for all the reasons you laid out. I think for the Big 12 too, it makes sense because mutually it's how neither side gets left behind, right? The Big 12 may still go along without Gonzaga, but it certainly strengthens their case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think like people are saying, oh, they won't break away because it's, part of the magic of, the NCAA tournament is first weekend, the first round, where you have all these small schools potentially pulling an upset. Here's the thing. I did the math. The high major programs have earned anywhere from 62 to 65% of the shares over the last 5 years. Not a high amount. Not a high bar to clear.
Right.
There's also the pesky middleman that keeps a lot of the revenue in the NCAA.
Yep.
Even if the whatever the new tournament is called makes 60 or 70% of what it made previously, and it probably makes more, but even if it only makes 60 to 70% of what it made previously, it makes sense for the high majors to take the middleman out.
Yep.
And 100% of the shares.
They come out on top. They come
out on top.
It's
it would have to be so catastrophically bad.
Yeah.
For them to not even consider it making sense.
Right. And you know what? You're still going to want to watch Kentucky and Michigan State. Right. You're still going to want to watch, well, maybe you don't want to watch Wisconsin and Virginia, but maybe you want to watch like Duke and Florida. Right? You watch that.
Yeah.
Of course you would, because we already do.
Yeah. I think the last dominoes to fall really are those three. I think Gonzaga probably winds up somewhere. I think Boise State and San Diego State probably have to wind up somewhere in those five as well. Like the San Diego State, because yes, it's Southern California, but also I think San Diego State, historically, their football and basketball programs are strong enough.
Yeah.
Boise State, because they're also, not necessarily recently, but they've also historically been a name program, especially in football, but in basketball as well. Like those three programs, I think, are going to be three of the last dominoes to fall if it's truly a breakaway from the NCAA.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well.
Hot takes for the Pac-12?
Let's do it. What you got? Let's just do West Coast in general. Let's see what
West Coast in general. Okay, that's better. I think that this is going to be too hot. I think Nolan Hickman is one of three first team all WCC players. I know it's not terribly hot, but he's been bad.
He hasn't been good.
Okay. I think Nolan Hickman emerges as the lead candidate for Gonzaga to win WCC Player of the Year. I'll go hot.
Okay. I already gave my Arizona to the Final Four take.
Yeah.
So that's out there. I think San Diego State gets back to the second weekend. I think that is almost a factual thing. I will be shocked if that doesn't happen. But I think we see three Mountain West teams in the Sweet 16. I think San Diego State is one of three playing in the second weekend. The three that I would have would be San Diego State, Nevada, and then either New Mexico or Colorado State, depending on the matchups and who's in what region. But I think we see three Mountain West teams playing on the second weekend.
Yeah. I could see it. Well, they'd have to make it in, but I could see it.
Okay. I think they get 5. I think Mountain West gets 5 in.
You think they get 5 in?
Yeah. One of them will be in the first 4. But I think the league has gotten enough credibility that some of those teams that would have been on the bubble would get the benefit of the doubt.
I'll throw this out. We didn't talk about them. I don't think UC Santa Barbara makes the NCAA tournament this year. I think and that's not a hot take because they have to play a tournament to get there. But I really like Long Beach State. I really like Hawaii.
The Long Beach State Beach?
The Long Beach State Beach. I really like those two teams. I think their perimeter play is on par. Maybe not on par, but just slightly behind where UC Santa Barbara is. I don't trust UC Santa Barbara's front court at all compared to the Traores at Long Beach State, or even what Hawaii has with, Morsek and some of their other front court players, Bernardo da Silva. Like I like those two front courts better than UC Santa Barbara, and the back courts just aren't healthy wise because both of them have health issues, especially last year. But I don't think they're nearly as far behind UC Santa Barbara as some people might argue.
I need to get one of these Long Beach State jerseys that just say beach on them.
They're awesome.
I need to get one of those.
They're awesome.
I am pro anything Long Beach State Beach at this point.
Well, and Long Beach State is cool because their basketball arena on the outside is really cool.
It's like a pyramid, right?
It kind of sucks, but yeah, on the inside it kind of sucks. But no, I like the Big West is going to be fun this year, but I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know if UC Santa Barbara is going to be. I don't even know if they win the conference regular season championship. To be honest, like that's how deep the top of the Big West is this year.
I love it. Only information you can get on the Heat Check Hangout. Thank you all for hanging out with us. We'll be back next week as we continue our season preview series. Where we go next, we don't know. We'll spin the wheel or see if any more preseason polls come out that we decide we want to talk about that day. We'll find out. But thank you all very much for listening or watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, if you're not watching us on YouTube, make sure you check us out at the Hangout CBB. Like, subscribe, do all those things on YouTube and wherever you listen to this on podcasts. All those things every podcast tells you to do because they do help out a ton. For our co-host Connor Hope, I'm Brian Ralph. We'll talk to you again next time.
Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, college. Oh. Basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.